W. Oh, with W.K. Kellogg Foundation. David teaches courses, facilitates workshops, lectures, and speaks on story and storytelling as a tool for community building, civic engagement, and leadership development. David believes that by teaching others how to harness the power of storytelling, social change is made possible. He is such a powerful teacher, and you are in for a treat. David.
Oh, thank you very much, Judith. Well, welcome everyone. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the ancient yet ever-present power of story and storytelling in every aspect of our lives, primarily because we're getting ready to talk about elections and being able to pull people into elections. And a lot of that is about story and storytelling. So why don't I just jump right on in here and start sharing my screen with you. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
All right. So look, so my job is to awaken within you this ancient yet ever-present power of story and storytelling in every aspect of our lives. And so to begin with, I want to say that outside of the laws that govern the physical universe which we live in, which is magical beyond our belief, and outside of our biological makeup, which we still don't have a full understanding of it, those two things are just amazing, and they impact our lives in so many ways. But outside of the laws that govern the physical universe and our biological makeup, there's nothing that impacts, informs, transforms, changes, guides the human spirit, the human journey, more than story. Story is that most important thing. The human being is a storytelling animal, always has been, and always will be. If you think back, reading and writing, quite frankly, are very new to the 70, 80,000 year experience of human beings. It's been through the spoken word for thousands and thousands of years that people were able to transmit their knowledge, their hopes, their dreams, their desires, what to do when the children reach a certain age, what to do when the crops come up, how to build a society. It has been through the spoken word. So story and storytelling are ancient, and we are storytelling animals, always have been, and always will be. How do we master and focus our ability to understand and share story in this campaign, in this journey we're on, inviting people into the electoral process, the civic engagement process? How do we use story and storytelling? Storytelling is very ancient. It has lots of passion into it. It actually helps to transform people who right now are just stuck looking into their phones all the time, into computers all the time, and bring them out of that. It's a major tool for kind of bringing people back into community life. Here are a few things I want you to remember. We live our lives based upon story and inside a story. That's what we do all the time. In fact, that's what we're doing this morning. The human being lives our lives based upon and inside a story, because we're the storytelling creature. And a little bit about what we talk about by story here is not like, beginning, the middle, the end, that sort of thing about a writing a story. It's a storehouse of our personal and our collective experiences. What are our dreams? What are our desires? What are our values, our beliefs, our hopes? That's what story is. And the way to think about it, by the way, it's not like there's one story for you, for your people, for us as an existence. It's more like, I grew up in Philadelphia, and there were 7 of us. And our idea was a vacation was to get in the car and to drive out to the Amish country and see what the Amish were doing. But we drive out these big silos, where people kept grain in. The way to think about story is this big silo of your hopes, your dreams, your desires, your values, your gifts, your talents. And every now and then you reach in, you pull a grain out and you put it in your mouth and say, let me tell you, children, about what happened to me, my people. If you're trying to get a job, you reach in, you pull out the grain and talk about, let me tell you about my gifts and why I can do this job. You're trying to communicate with some of your neighbors, you pull out a little bit of story about your journey to that community, right? So think about story that way. It's not one big thing, it's a collection of all these things. Now here's the next important thing. If you control the story and the storyteller, you will control the minds of the people. And if you control the minds of the people, you will control the bodies of the people. So at all costs, you must control the story and the storyteller. January 6th, what you saw were people running up the steps into the Capitol, you saw their bodies. The question was, what was in their mind that drove them to do such a thing? And what were the stories that drove them? And who told them those stories? It's not the body. It's the stories that propel people up those steps and into things. There's some transformative questions about the power of story in our lives we must always be asking ourselves. And quite frankly, these transformative questions should be asking almost every day. You know, what's the story that's living you in your life right now? And why are those stories? And who told you those particular stories? And why did your mother, your father, society, why did they tell you those stories? What was their motivation for telling you those stories that you are now living inside of? And do those stories still work for you, for us as a nation, as a people, for the world? Or do we need a whole new set of stories to live our lives based upon and inside of? That's the question before us. And in this particular point, when you're going to be going out to bring people into civic engagement, into the community life, you are that storyteller. You are that storyteller. And what is your story that you're going to be telling people to bring them in? What is your personal story about your hopes, your dreams, your desires, your values? How has being engaged in the political process in elections impacted you, your family? What's your story? What are your hopes, your dreams, your desires about being engaged in this political process and how it will help generations to come? What is your story? You know, a couple of examples of storytelling all around us right now. You know, a few years ago, Michelle Obama's book was the #1 selling book in the country. And on the back of the book was what the whole book was about. I know all you got the book. I know you all kind of read the book. I know you all did. From the fireplace, bottle of wine, somebody rubbing your feet, you read the book. But at the back of the book, she tells the whole thing, right? And she talks about the power of story, right? She talks about the power of story. She ends by saying, your story is what you have, is what you will always have. It is something that you own. The #1 book in America talks about story. How many of you went out to see Hamilton? Okay, how many of you wanted to go, but you were too broke, you didn't have enough money to go? Right, well, how does Hamilton end? Hamilton ends with a song that says, you know, who lives, who dies, who tells your story? The whole play is about the power of story, the whole play. The #1 book, the #1 thing on Broadway, the power of story. In fact, for those of you who watched the Game of Thrones, I know a lot of you did, 8 series, 8 years, it ends, the final episode ends with the person talking about who will lead us. And they say the person who should lead us into the future after millions of people been killed, dragons killed, people slain, it should be the person who knows our story. That should be our leader, who knows our hopes, our dreams, our desires, our woundedness, our victories. That should be our leaders. #1 television program, #1 book, #1 thing on Broad Street, on Broadway, all yelling at us simultaneously. Story is the most powerful thing we have. We're trying to be told this, but we miss it. Story is all around us. Story kills. What's going on right now in Russia and Ukraine? What did he do? He started telling stories about how those people were always Russians, how they really weren't even a country. What did he do? He was controlling the story and the storytellers on the media there in order to dehumanize people, in order to change the story about their history, in order therefore to set them up to go and invade, right? He used story, and we did the same thing. We did the same thing talking about in Iraq, how he had weapons of mass destruction. And meantime, he told people there that, you know, we disrespected their religion, disrespected their book, and a bunch of them got on a plane, came here and crashed into buildings and killed thousands of people. And then we started talking about how they were less than human, how they didn't believe in God, how they didn't believe in democracy, how they treated their children wrong. And then after about 35% of people could tell that story back, we sent our mothers and daughters, sisters and brothers, uncles and aunts, cousins, over to a country they couldn't even find on a map 6 months ago, and drop bombs and kill people by the thousands, and be killed by the thousands. It's through story that we send our people into war. It is through story. And then after a while, after we believe that we have reached some objectives and want to make peace, we begin to heal. And we begin to tell stories about how they are just like us, how they love their children, their grandchildren, how they want freedom, justice, and equality. And after about 55% of us can repeat that story back, we then can make peace with them again, because we have now used story to humanize them. Story kills. Story kills. And story also heals. It's all around us. The ancient, ever-present power of story and storytelling is all around us all the time. We must awaken to that power and begin to use it for ways of good. You When we talk about community all the time, by the way, we say, the community on this side of the bay, that side of the bay, the community in this part of the valley. And when we say we want to have a better sense of community, what we're actually saying there, when we talk about a better sense of community, is that we want to be in better relationship with each other. How do we relate to each other better? How do we treat each other with more respect, see each other, hear each other, cherish each other, lift each other up? Inside that word community, by the way, is an actual formula for that. It's a word the Greeks stole from the Ethiopian, from the Egyptians who borrowed it from the Nubians. There's a formula for that. If you want to be in better relationships with people, the first thing you got to do is figure out what you have in common with them. Not the way the sun bounces off our skin, which we have very little to do, but it's what are your shared hopes, your shared dreams, your shared desires? How has life wounded you and how you struggle to overcome those wounds? And the only way that you can figure out what you have in common with people is create safe and sometimes even sacred space for people to take off these heavy masks we wear all the time and simply sit down and tell our stories. You don't know your neighbors if you don't know their stories. You don't know the people you work with if you don't know their stories. Heck, you don't even know some of your family members if you don't know their stories. If you really want to figure out what we have in common, you got to create safe and sometimes sacred space for people simply to sit down and tell their stories. You cannot be in relationship without creating safe, authentic space for stories. It's impossible. The second part about the word unity is how do we therefore, after we figure out what we have in common, work in a unified fashion to bring about the change in which we want. And the third part of that word community is the word commune, which is how do we have fun along the way? How do we sing and dance and spin around and do ritual and smoke legal things and read poetry? How do we have fun along the way? Because who wants to be with a bunch of people they don't know, are not working in a unified fashion, and you're not having fun? So if we want to create a sense of community, we must create a way where we're constantly allowing people to take off their masks and share their stories on an ongoing basis, figure out a way to work in unified fashion and have fun along the way. Story is central to building community. We cannot have community without story. There's evidence of storytelling all around us. I said earlier that, again, outside the laws of the physical universe and our biological makeup, nothing shapes, guides us more than story. Well, in mythology, 85% of there's a lot of mythology out there, and the origin stories, there are lots and lots of origin stories. In 85% of the origin stories, the world comes into existence through the spoken word. In Christianity, in the beginning there was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was good, and the word was God, right? In Islam, Allah says, kun fayakun, come be, and it is. The Big Bang. God says, let there be light. The reason why 85% of all these origin stories begin with the spoken word is the way the ancients are telling us how powerful story and the spoken word is. It's all around us, shapes us, guides us, moves us in so many ways. Time itself, time itself is based upon story. If I was to ask you what year it is, you would say 2021. Yes, if you're a Christian. Well, for our Jewish friends, is it 2021? Or wait, we're 2022 now, sorry about that. No, it's not 2022. If you're Muslim, it's not 2022. If you're Hindu or Buddhist or Baha'i, whatever it is not that year. Because those years are based upon the stories in which they are living their lives. Time itself is based upon story. The days of the week are all based upon story. Saturday for the Roman god Saturn. Sorry about that, a little bit fast. Sunday is for the sun god, Wednesday for another god, Thursday for another god. Thor actually is my favorite one. The days of the week are all based upon story, all around us, shapes us, guides us, moves us in so many ways. If I was to ask you what type of God do you believe in, a vengeful, jealous God, a merciful, compassionate God, a he God, a she God, one God, many gods, God lives above ground or below ground, all comes to us in the form of story. And for thousands of years, it's been through story. And we live our lives based upon and inside of those stories. We live our lives based upon and inside of those stories. It's all around us. Story shapes us, guides us, moves us in so many ways. What's the difference between these folks here, the Methodist, a Muslim, a Mormon, Hindu, Baha'i, a Jew, Anglican, Episcopalian, Roman Catholic. What's the difference between them? They all have the same biological makeup. They pretty much accept people regardless of the way the sun bounces off their skin. They pretty much accept people regardless of what nation they're in. What's the difference between these people? The only difference is the stories that they have decided to live their lives inside of. That's the only difference, is the stories that they have decided to live their lives inside of. Stories all around us, shapes us, guides us, all around us. The human being is the storytelling creature, always has been, always will be. The way we greet each other. Sister, what's been happening to you? What's been going on? We're asking for a story. Go see your therapist, asking for a story. Black Lives Matter, telling the stories. Me too. All these are ways in which we have story in every aspect of our life all the time. Family reunions, hip hop, rap, country music, definitely storytelling. Podcast, storytelling. Most of our meetings are nothing but storytelling. Job interviews. Almost everything we do on a day-to-day basis, from greeting to arguments and making up, are all based upon story. You have a big argument, and then later on you try to make up, or actually the argument is basically saying, let me tell you what you said and what you've done and how that might have wounded me through the telling of a particular story about me. Here's what you said about me. Arguments and makeup are based around story. You know, makeup night. Hey, baby, well, what had happened, reason I said that, baby, I'm sorry, but what had happened was when you said something, it sparked something in me that happened to me before. Or maybe it put some darkness on where I wanted to go in the future. The story that we were talking about at that particular time of the argument harmed me in some particular way. Now I want to retell you about what happened so we can make up through story. It's all around us, shapes us, guides us. Dating, nothing but storytelling, nothing but storytelling. I want you to think back on that really, really special someone in your life, that really special someone. Not the 20 special someones over the years. I'm talking about that really special someone in your life right now. You first met him or her, you told them all the same stories you told everybody else, how you was all this and all that and what you can do for them. You told them all the attraction stories. But at some point you said, I kind of like her, or I kind of like him, right? And then in some quiet place, not the bar, you said, hey, just for a moment, can I take off this heavy mask I'm wearing and tell you who I really am? Can I tell you about my hopes, my dreams, my desires, my fears? Can I tell you who might have taken my voice away from me and how I was wounded in life and how I'm struggling even today to overcome those wounds? Let me tell you why I can never be maybe with my family. Let me tell you about that journey. Just for a moment, let me take off my mask and tell you who I really truly am. And if you were lucky, really, really lucky, the person turned to you and said, let me take off my mask just for a moment, tell you about my life, my hopes, my dreams, my desires, maybe who gave me a sense of myself, or maybe why I must always be with my family. Let me tell you about my dreams for me, for my people. And in that moment, in that sacred moment, you fell in love based upon story. And you moved in together, and you met the rest of the family. You know how that went. The only advice I give people is when you marry somebody, you marry the whole family. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So you might as well get to them all sooner or later, right? So stories all around us, shapes us, guides us in so many ways because it's about relationships. Divorce is basically saying, hey, the story that we co-created together at one particular point, it doesn't work for either one of us together anymore. Our hopes, our dreams, our desires, our gifts and talents don't match up anymore. We need to go separate ways to continue our journey differently, to continue the story that we are continually making. It's all around us, story. Since we're talking about the elections, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about elections here. So, I lived in Chicago. I was an organizer in Chicago, South Side. Barack Obama was my representative. But, he ran for office. Most people didn't know Barack Obama. They didn't know him. They didn't know him and most people never met Hillary Clinton either. But what did they do? They engaged in telling stories about their hopes, their dreams, their desires. And in their stories, people saw their stories, right? Elections are nothing but storytelling competitions driven by money. And people vote for people based upon the stories in which they have told them. Right? Elections are nothing but storytelling competitions driven by money. Political conventions, storytelling events. Congressional impeachments and hearings, storytelling events. All of these things are storytelling events, right? It's all around us all the time to shape public opinion about policies and behaviors so they can control the minds of the people, control the bodies of the people, and therefore control society. All around us, shapes us, guides us. 2019 was the 100th anniversary of when women, particularly white women, got to vote in the United States. Why couldn't women vote prior to that? Why couldn't they vote? What was the tool that was used to deny them the vote? Yeah, it was legal and a bunch of other things, but basically it was story. Women were too emotional, didn't have the intellectual capacity. The role of the woman is to stay at home with the children, etc. And people lived their lives based upon it inside of those stories. And what did women do in order to change that? They went on years and years of campaigns to change that, and they used story to do that. This is from a movie called Iron Jaw Women.
I think 1,000 marching means more than 10,000 signatures on a piece of paper. Suffrage is not a dead issue. It's us. It's you. It's living, breathing women. We're not just a petition that can be crumpled up and tossed away. And this is what marching does. Marching shows the politicians that we women are united in our demand for political. Show me a raise. Screw the politician. Go ahead if you think it'll help. Now, there's 146 women burned to death in a factory fire last month. Where's your fire escape? Laws were made by elected officials. A fire escape can be required by law. A vote is a fire escape. We take Sunday off. We la-di-da for you. We get fired on Monday. Your children, missus, they don't eat ballots. Go ahead, shut your head off. The ruling class are those who have a voice, and that voice is a vote. No one hears you. Books for women. It's going to happen, and please, would you like one? The more the merrier. One. Pratar vi kokisho. Vote is a fire escape. A vote is a fire escape. Not your horse in the street and that's right. A vote is a fire escape. Not your the street. This has been Sloves. Good. Alice Hall. Don't give me the rest, college girl.
So I'm going to show that again in a minute, but I want you to see what they actually did here. One person was just talking about why the vote, it was kind of dead. It wasn't impacting the women there. These were working class women who've been working in factories in New York City. Previous to that, there was a fire that the doors were locked and over 100 women burned to death in this building. In here, there's a distinction between class. You see class distinction here. You see nationality distinction here. You see all that going on here. But what she does successfully is talked about the story, changes the story in such a way that it impacted their personal lives right then for them, right? And by changing the story and focusing on what happened to them and their people and how it would benefit them, people then got brought into it. So I'll play it again. Watch closely again how she does that.
Suffrage is not a dead issue. It's us. It's you. It's living, breathing women. We're not just a petition that can be crumpled up and tossed away. And this is what marching does. Marching shows the politicians that we women are united in our demand for political. Show me a raise. Screw the politician. Go ahead if you think it'll help. Now, there's 146 women burned to death in a factory fire last month. Where's your fire escape? Laws were made by elected officials. A fire escape can be required by law. A vote is a fire escape. We take Sunday off to la-di-da for you. We get fired on Monday. Your children, missus, they don't eat ballots. Go ahead, shut your head off. The ruling class are those who have a voice, and that voice is a vote. No one hears you. Books for women. Parade's going to happen, and please, would you like one? The more the merrier. one? Chocolate cookies, sure. A vote is a fire escape. A vote is a fire escape. Not your horse in the street. That's right. A vote is a fire escape. 1950. What the street is? This has been Slubs. Good. Alice Paul. Don't give me the rest, college girl.
You see, even at the end, the relationship was built there. So it's all around us. Story is all around us, and we must use it. Storytelling is one of the most powerful tools for social change. You know, when we're recruiting people to our organizations and to our campaigns, it's through story. We use story to raise money, to explain both what the people's problems are and also what the solution is. We use it to inspire people around the victories, to testify at meetings, to shape the issues in the media. We use story all the time as a tool for social change. So that's why we must master story and storytelling in all of our work. We must first get to understand how powerful it is and realize that almost all the time, all we are doing is using or being used by the power of story and storytelling. You know, public policy, first of all, policy is Greek for behavior. So people get freaked out when they say, I'm not a policy expert. Don't worry about that. Policy is the behavior. When they say public policy, they mean public behavior. They mean government policy is government behavior. They say corporate policy is corporate behavior. Church policy is the behavior. But where does it really come from, right? When we're trying to change the behavior, what we do is we say, here's the existing behavior or policy and how it's harming our people, right? And then we say, we want to change that behavior. Let me tell you what our hopes, our dreams, our desires are for this new behavior, this new policy. And so don't get confused or afraid when sometimes they say we're going to have a policy debate or what's your policy? It's what's your behavior? How's that behavior, present behavior, harming us, helping us, tell stories about it, but also use story to talk about the future behavior. Story and storytelling is one of the most powerful tools for policy change. And it's created out of our hopes, our fears, our dreams, our desires for our planet, for our people. That's where it comes from, right? And when you go to see testimonies, that's what's going on. Now, as an organizer, I got to say, I do believe in the power of story, but it has to be backed up with the power of with organized power as well. So when someone is testifying, it's great they're telling their personal story, but they must say how that personal story impacts a large number of people. This is not just my story, but 25% of the people in your district. Not just my story, but everybody who's in our union. Not just my story, but everybody who works on this particular farm. Not just my story, but all the women in this organization. The story must be told in such a way that it reflects a collective vision, a collective power, a collective view, not just an individual view. Oftentimes people say we're going to go tell some stories, but the stories must be framed in such a way that it shows collective desires, collective woundedness, collective power. It's all around us. Shapes, guides, transforms us in so many ways. Story is here. You know, 2019 was also the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising. Now remember what happened prior to that. A few years ago in Ohio, you could lose your job, be thrown out of your apartment if you were gay, right? This country was very brutal towards people who had a different sexual orientation, right? Gay, lesbian, didn't matter. Very brutal. What happened? All of a sudden people started saying, wait a minute, let's all come out. Everybody come out. All of a sudden people start coming out. And they say, wait a minute, you mean the guy who works with me is gay? We cool, we hang out together. You mean my minister's gay? You mean my cousin is gay? You mean the person who delivers my mail is gay? You mean this politician is gay? You mean the woman at the grocery store is gay? You mean all these people are gay? And I hang out with them all the time and they're all good people? It started changing the story, right? It started changing the story that had been told. And they have money and they have political influence. It started changing public policy. You change the story backed up by power, you can change public behavior, right? Stories all around us. It shapes us, guides us, moves in so many ways. 2019 was also the 400th anniversary of the first people brought over from Africa to be brought into enslaved in this country. What would allow the psyche of someone to enslave other human beings for 250 years and treat them so so badly? What happened to their mind? Did they come out the womb that way? No, it was the stories that were told to them, that these weren't really humans. They were born to be bred. They were born to work this way. They weren't like us. It was stories that allowed not just people of African descent, but quite frankly, people around the world to be put into bondage, to be enslaved, to be tortured. It's through story. Stories all around us. Shapes us, guides us, moves in so many ways. It's a great debate going on right now in this country about what stories should be told about the American history. Some people saying we can't tell that story because it's going to make some other people feel bad. Some other people saying, wait a minute, that's the story of our lives, and we felt bad about it all the time. If you control the story, if you control the story and the storyteller, you'll control the minds. If you control the minds, you'll control the bodies. If you control the bodies, you'll control their behavior. So there's a debate going on right now about what is the real story or a different story of America. And how can we tell that story in such a way that allows us to create and maintain a more perfect union amongst ourselves? It's all around us. The human being is a storytelling animal, always has been, always will be. And if you control the story and the storyteller, you will control the people's minds and you will control the people's bodies. So at all costs, we have to control the story and the storytellers. You, on this particular campaign, on this journey, are the storyteller. What will be the story that you will tell when you were talking to people at their door, at the bus stop, at their job, to bring them into this political arena, to bring them into civic engagement? What is your story about what happened to you, your people? How has the election process helped you and your people or harmed you and your people? What is the story about you and your people that you'll be telling people at the door about how, if they get engaged in the election process, how it will help them and maybe generations to come? What's the story you would tell? Will you have the courage, quite frankly, the respect, to take off your mask and authentically tell people your story about what happened to you, your people, to make you want to get engaged in this and why they should be engaged in it? If we can't find a read to do again, specs to see. If we can't find that courage to tell our stories, why should people tell us their story about why they should get engaged, why they want to get engaged? What are their fears about being engaged in the political process? We first have to model for them authenticity, courage, and safety by telling our own story when we engage with people. It's all around us. Shapes us, guides us, and moves us in so many ways. Story does. I'm going to stop at that. I'm going to stop at that for a minute. And stop at that for a minute and just say a few more things about story. We're told this all the time, by the way, that we live in the most powerful, richest nation the world has ever known. And it's pretty much true. We just went through a big pandemic, lots of people not working. We just printed more money. Previous president gave the biggest tax cut in American history. And our country didn't fall apart, didn't fall into depression, didn't fall apart, war. Other countries couldn't do that, but we were able to do that. So we live in the richest, most powerful nation the world has ever known, but we don't have health care. When our 7 children go to bed hungry at night, we can't afford to send our kids off to school and off to college without them coming out with thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Our education system is falling apart. Millions of people can't afford homes. What's wrong? What's wrong? In part is because they have told us stories about how we should be fearing each other. Fear each other based upon the way the sun bounces off our skin or our nationality or our language or our religion or our gender. We live in a culture where they keep us divided all the time. So we cannot unite. And they use story to do that. We live inside the stories they've told about us, about each other. We live in one of the most fearful societies. One of the most fearful societies that's not actually at war. So we also live in a time right now where more money is coming down from the federal government than ever before in the last 71 years. Lots and lots of money is coming down. How do we use this opportunity to engage people in taking these resources that are coming down and changing their lives, improving the lives of their neighbors, their friends, their family? How do we get them engaged in this electoral process and in this public behavior process of shaping this money, how it can really help us. This is one of those moments that organizers dream for. It only happens, very few times. Very few times does a moment like this come around. When so many people are awake about the social injustice happening in America for all sorts of people, so many people are awake and questioning things, and there's actually money coming down to do something about it. But we're in this great moment. And this process of going out and talking to people who have not been engaged in the political process, talking about this moment and how it can change their life, or more importantly, the lives of their children's children. Oh, this is a great time to be alive and to be an organizer. And lastly, you gotta remember, when people come and knock on our doors, go to our church, our mosque, our synagogues, our gambling halls, wherever they come, knock on our doors and ask us for the honor of representing us, what they're saying is, give me the honor of talking about whether there be pollution in the air, will your children go to school or not, how much taxes you will pay, who you can marry, what you can wear, can you travel in and outside this country, what will be in your food, your water, can you even have a job, we have transportation. They come and ask us for that honor. And then we give it to them, and then sometimes they walk away. Right? But whatever they're doing, because these people now have power over every aspect of our lives, they're not just impacting us here today. They're impacting 2, 3, 4 generations down the road. So this is one of those magical moments in American history, where if we do it right, we can really do it right and engage lots of people, regardless of the way the sun bounces off their skin, their language, their nationality, their job, where they live, and engage them in the political process to really bring about big change in America. I just want to encourage you to go on out and do your thing. Get more and more people engaged, because if we don't, this temporary small experiment, it really is a really small experiment called democracy, just might fail. Just might fail. I don't think so, but it could. So I just want to encourage you to go out and do that. I'm going to end there, Judith, and turn it back over to you and people. But again, my friends, go do your thing. Take off your mask, tell your story about what happened to you, your people, and how the electoral process and being engaged in it has changed your life.
So, David, before you sign off,
Mhm.
could you give us an example of you're at the door and somebody says, I don't think my vote counts. I don't think my vote matters.
Mhm.
Could you give us an example of a personal story you would tell that person about voting
Mhm.
and its importance?
Yeah, when I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, they were building new schools all around, but they weren't building schools in my particular neighborhood. But because we did an analysis, I wouldn't say it's this long to them, but because we turned out even more people to vote who never voted before, we forced them to build a school in my neighborhood, which gave me a much better education than the people who had lived in that neighborhood before me. That's one example. The second example, which is really cool, and it actually happened in my life as well, is when I was getting ready to go away to college, there was not really a college fund. But because we got out and registered 450 people in one district, we convinced one elected official who was the final vote to create a college fund that allowed me to go to school and only pay $65 my first year in school. And that's why I'm here today. I can talk about these things. So those are my personal experiences. So what I want to drum home is, don't tell a story about theory. Think about your own life, how election has impacted you personally. You may not even been involved in it. Your parents might have done it. Your grandparents might have done it, but how it's actually impacted your life. And by the way, too, you're going to be working in a particular area. What I would suggest, too, is look around, and you should know it. What are the woundedness that's happening in those communities? What's the woundedness that's happening that elections can actually change? As an organizer, I like to talk about numbers. So I can say, well, this particular person only won by 450 votes, who's been doing all these bad, voting the wrong way. You and your congregation can come up with 200 of those votes. And just in this neighborhood alone, there's 500 people. And we could change that just by registering and voting. So also plug it into what's personally going on in people's lives. So what's happening in your life has changed, but also what's going on in that turf, that neighborhood, and their lives at that particular time. Education is a big one. Everybody wants their children to be better educated. Health is a big one. And money is also a big particular one. Those are 3 areas that almost everybody is feeling suffering around. Housing is a big thing in California as well. And so to the degree that if there's actually a way to talk about how if we can convince 2 or 3 elected officials in your particular city to give some of the land that the city owns to create more affordable housing, that's an example. In this town, there's lots of land owned by the city, We want them to give it to somebody who's going to develop affordable housing. Only way we can get that elected official to do that is by registering and voting and to push them to do it. Okay? So connect it to what's happening in their life, but start with what happened in your life. You'd be surprised. People don't look like you, don't pray like you, don't eat like you. They're like you. They have the same hopes, the fears, the same dreams, the same desires. Don't believe what people said about, right? So be authentic.
Excellent advice. Thank you, David. So thank you very much for your words of wisdom. And I can't wait to start canvassing and sharing my story about why voting matters to me. We are now going to take a short 5-minute break. So hurry back, and I will give you a 1-minute warning when that 5 minutes is up.
Where did my puppies go? Where did my puppy?
Margaret's puppies. Oh my God, Judith, I'm like floored. That was extraordinary. Just thank you.
It was, yes.
Extraordinary.
Judith, where did you find this person?
Well,
I have another group I'd like for him to speak to.
Oh, yes. Andrea Miller, I'm an organizer for Center for Common Ground, and Andrea Miller sponsored some organizing training for us, and David put on all the training. He just was moving. Yeah, really incredible. So,
Yeah, everything rings true. Everything he says.
yeah. Oh, great.
Okay.
Good. Well, we're off to a good start.
I'll be right back.
All right, you got 4 more minutes. Hurry back.
Judith, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
My computer died.
Oh, no.
I'm not. And so, and the plug I'm looking for, they didn't have the three thing adapters. Sorry
Right.
about that.
Well, everybody loved what you had to say. Thank you.
No worries. All right. Did we hit what we want? Did we get what we want to get on that?
Yeah, it was great. People, a couple of people asked me if you're available to speak to their groups. So that's good. And then I think Bonnie will pull it all
Okay.
together.
All right. You got my contact stuff. Sorry. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. All right, everybody. Sorry about that.
Okay. Hey, are you coming tomorrow?
All right.
Are you going to be able to join us?
I might. I got to figure that out. But that would be such a great surprise, wouldn't it?
It would.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope.
Right.
So. Okay.
Everybody. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, David.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Mary, you have a question? Oh, I guess she's gone.
Her hand is up.
Yeah, her hand is up. Joan, do you have a question?
I do. To go into the Spanish room, Is that for people who already speak Spanish or for people who want to learn how to communicate some things to Spanish speaking
You
people?
should have a pretty good background. You should be at least
Okay.
a moderate speaker.
Okay,
You shouldn't be a beginner.
okay, very good. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for asking that question. So 1 minute warning before we start again. We've got 2 more hours. I hope everybody did a little stretching, made a quick bathroom trip, and we're all ready to go. All right. 6 more seconds. So thank you, but if you came in late and you don't know about our renaming process, after Bonnie Dobson speaks, you will need to rename yourself either ESP or 34 if you want to be moved into the room to connect with high potential speakers. ESP, if you speak Spanish, you don't have to be fluent, but you have to have a moderate ability to speak. In that room, you'll learn vocabulary. You'll learn how to speak to people of different generations and different genders. And please take a minute and rename yourself right now. And after Bonnie speaks, we will move you into the correct breakout room. So I am welcome back from your break. And I'm really pleased to introduce you to Bonnie Dobson. She is the Deep Canvas Manager at Down Home, North Carolina. So she spends, this is what she does, deep canvassing. So we are so fortunate to have her. So she leads a team to make real lasting connections with North Carolinians across the state. So Bonnie, this is a talk about storytelling. This is a great story. She was introduced to deep canvassing when one of Down Home's organizers canvassed her regarding her thoughts on immigration and healthcare in 2019. That conversational approach was so unlike any other. Bonnie jumped at the opportunity to join Down Home the following year. So this is the power of the story. She believes that these kind of conversations bring folks together, reinforce the belief that regardless of our color or our economic status, deep down, we all want the same things: food on our table, a safe place to live, and a community that doesn't leave anybody behind and works for everyone. So I am so pleased to introduce Bonnie Dobson, our next trainer.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. That was a great talk we had by David, and it kind of flows right into what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm just excited to be here with everybody. I hope you get a lot out of this training, and I'm going to call it really kind of an overview of deep canvassing, because typically it takes about 3 hours to train on this skill. But I think with what David has shared with us and what you'll hear in the next session, you should be fine and ready to go. So without further ado, I will start with our slides. Thank you. Thank you. If you'll go to the next one, please. I noticed that everybody, I have the chat sitting up over here. So if you see me looking over there, it's just because I'm kind of following along with what everybody's talking about. But I know you all put in the chat already, whoops, excuse me, in the chat already your location, and you said hello, which is wonderful. But I'd also like for you to take a minute or a second to kind of tell us a little bit about what brings you to this work, your personal why. It's really your story of how you got here, what's important to you. So if you'll just take a second to put that in the chat, your personal story and what kind of brings you to this work. What are your dreams, your aspirations for getting out there and encouraging folks to vote? While you're doing that, we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So kind of your story is kind of why we're here, right? It's our grounding. Let's see, some folks are saying, let's see, we all matter. Yeah. Radical right organizing is destroying our democracy. Very good. All of those things are true. Everything that's there is true. But I think we can also agree that we are all interested in a better world and a better place to raise our families. No matter where we come from, and Judith mentioned this early on, you know, we just really want the same thing, right? We just want safety, dignity, and a better quality of life for our children and our grandbabies and everybody that's coming after us. Next slide, please. We're also here to build power. And what does that mean exactly? Well, we're here to organize the folks out in California, right? In order to have the world we want to live in order to have that vision of the place that we think is the best for our kids and our grandkids, we have to build power in our own communities. Next slide, please. And the way we build power is by listening and uplifting the voices of marginalized communities right there in California, right here in North Carolina. That's where I'm from. Next slide. So here's our agenda for today. It is kind of packed, but it's doable. And we're going to talk a little bit about our training goals. Going to give you an overview of what deep canvassing is. We're going to talk a little bit about building rapport, compassionate listening and curiosity, responsive storytelling. Again, goes right back to what David was talking about, how we should be relating and sharing our vulnerable, authentic selves with voters. We're going to do a little script review. And then if we have some time, we're going to go over review and best practices. Next slide, please. So first, to give you a brief overview of deep canvassing. Next slide. Next slide. So what is deep canvassing? It's a method that we use to elicit emotionally significant experiences and encourage reflection. When you deep canvass, you use active listening to encourage voters to tell their stories. You do this by asking a lot of open-ended questions, right? So you get out there with a script and you're talking to voters and you're asking them about their own personal experiences. And then you share your own personal story, your own personal experience as it relates to the topic that you're canvassing on. In this particular case, as it relates to voting and why you think voting is important, why folks need to get out and vote. And you base that in your own personal story, why it's important to you, something that happened in your life, something that happened in your community. It's your personal story that's going to move the voter. Next slide, please. Actually, let me just ask you a question by show of hands, and real hands, please, if you don't mind. How many of you have experienced a loss or a medical crisis or loss of income? Or how many of you are sick and tired of rising gas prices? That would be me. Deep canvassing shows us that we're all much more alike than we are different. So it helps us connect with a voter by showing what we have in common, no matter our political beliefs or our color or our gender or where we come from. Deep canvassing explores the commonality among us, right? So many people have a healthcare story. So many people have experienced a loss of income, maybe not now, but at some point in their life, or they know somebody that has experienced a loss of income. We come together with deep canvassing by sharing those stories, by relating. So successful deep canvassing truly relies on utilizing curiosity, not judgment. Those are two sides of the same coin, right? Curiosity opens people up, judgment shuts people down. We use compassionate listening. We build rapport with that voter. Building rapport is so critical. When the person first answers a door or answers a phone, most of my deep canvassing is on the phone. So I've got to get in there fairly quickly and establish something that I have in common with that person so that they'll continue to talk to me. I talk to them like they're a friend. Hey, how are you doing? My name is Bonnie. I'm with Down Home. I just continue talking with them. How are you doing today? I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how we can make our community better. And one of the ways that I really believe we can make our community better is by voting. So I get into the conversation, I build that rapport. That keeps people from hanging up on me. It keeps the door from being slammed in my face. Some additional deep canvassing skills, utilizing silence. It's a good one for me because when folks are quiet, I kind of want to fill that space. That's what most of us tend to do. And by being quiet, by just listening, people are going to kind of try to fill that space because they feel uncomfortable. We dig for emotionally relevant story gold. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this for later on in the presentation. And then we guide the conversation rather than dictating it. Next slide, please. So let's talk about and dig into building rapport. Next slide. Building rapport allows us to hold that voter's attention. As I said, keep them engaged in the conversation. It keeps them talking with you. Next slide. There are 4 keys to building rapport. First, there is no perfect way. Everybody gets into a conversation differently, and that is perfectly okay. One thing you want to do is you want to use a friendly, non-judgmental tone. Deep canvassing really is about not judging because everybody comes from a different place, right? They come from a place of, well, it's their story. Goes back to what David said. Their story, their personal trauma, their personal experiences, whatever that is, shapes them. And they don't need to be judged. We need to listen. We need to be compassionate. We need to understand. Next slide, please. You need to kind of move confidently through your script. Get to know your script. Really read it over and go through it so that you don't have to be holding it in front of you and you can just ad lib. And then you need to find common ground. And again, David spoke about this, and it's key to deep canvassing. Find ways to relate to a voter. If you're talking with someone about healthcare, oh, I understand that. I get that. Something similar happened to me when I was, and you share and relate. That's the key. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I want to say that I didn't mention earlier is that every deep canvas script follows the same outline. Typically, you're going to build rapport right there in the beginning of the script. And then every deep canvas script also has a 1 to 10 scale. You might see a 0 to 10. I prefer 1 to 10. It's much easier. This 1 to 10 scale, we're going to talk about a little bit in the next slide. If you could forward to the next one. So why do we have a 1 to 10 scale question in our script? And I'll give you an example of that question. It might be something like, do you believe the government has done enough to create a strong economy? Where 1 is you believe the government has done enough, and 10 is you believe on a scale of 1 to 10 that the government hasn't done enough. So that's what I mean by a 1 to 10 scale question. That 1 to 10 scale question allows you to hear the voters' honest opinion and understand the complexity of their views. If you ask a yes, no question, you don't really get a whole lot of information out of that. But if you ask that question that I just posed before, do you believe the government has done enough to help build a strong economy? If somebody says 5, that tells you quite a bit. That means they don't really know, right? If they say a 1, that they haven't done anything, they haven't done enough, well, then that tells you something. If they say 10, that the government has done more than enough, that tells you something. But a yes, no gets you really nowhere. Once they give you that scale question, or once they answer that scale question, you can dig a little bit deeper. Why is that the right number for you? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Again, you want to stick to the script. You want to listen carefully without judgment. And then again, ask those follow-up questions. Next slide, please. We're going to move into the compassionate listening and curiosity section of the agenda. And I'll go over that. Next slide. Thank you. So when you're deep canvassing, you want to use curiosity without judgment. Curiosity, again, is openness, and judgment is the complete opposite. If you judge a person in a call, say somebody says something like, well, I don't believe in free speech. People should not be saying everything that they're saying nowadays. They should not be saying it in the schools. They should not, it's against this or that. If you judge that person and say, well, that doesn't sound right to me, it's going to shut them down. You're not going to get anywhere. But if you say, you know what, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Why is it that you believe that way? I'm really curious about that. And then follow that up with more open-ended questions to kind of dig deep into why that person has that view. What shaped that person's opinion? There's usually a story there. And if we can uncover that story, we can kind of unpack some of that stuff that they're holding. Next slide, please. I kind of mentioned this already. We use curiosity to dig for shared values and to uncover folks' self-interest, right? We want to find their emotional core. People vote from an emotional place. They make opinions based on an emotional place, based on their stories, based on their history. If we can get to that emotional place, we have an opportunity to reach in and kind of influence them or persuade them. We can deal with some of the conflict that they're feeling around a certain choice or a certain decision. But judgment completely shuts them down. Next slide, please. This is one of those scripts that we used in a deep canvas back in the fall. And it's in here as just an example for you. Again, there's the building the rapport section in the beginning of the script. You have this scale question, and then you get into your stories, which is the real meat of a deep canvas. And actually, throughout the entire script, you're going to pause and reflect and ask folks to tell you more. Right here in the middle of this section, where you see the story buckets, you'll see a cone. That's what we call the cone of curiosity. We want to use that to dig and uncover folks' stories? What's at the emotional core of whatever decision that they have? If they've decided not to vote and they don't even want to register, what is that about? What's at the emotional core of that? Can you tell me why you feel that way? Next slide, please. So these are some helpful ways to kind of dig deeper without judgment. I mentioned, tell me more about that. When did that happen? Wow. Can you tell me where? Who is there? What? How? How did that feel? That focuses in on emotions. Verbal cues you can use. Yeah, I can share the cone of curiosity with you too, by the way. I see that in the chat. Thank you. Repeat backs. That's basically just kind of repeating back what the person said. You know, I hear you. You say that, you know, you've had some real issues with healthcare, and I understand that completely. Let me tell you about my own healthcare story. I want to share with you. And then when you do tell your story, you want to have responsive storytelling. Don't tell a story of a story. The storytelling is key to deep canvassing. What you want to do when you tell your story is paint a picture, a clear picture for somebody. One of the stories that I typically share with folks when I'm deep canvassing, at least, especially when it concerns healthcare, I talk a lot about a family member of mine who suffers from mental illness. And I talk about some of the times that I've seen him when he's struggling, right? I tell folks that, you know, it hurts. It hurts to see this person that I love so much struggle with mental illness, when I know that if we had better health care in our country, if we cared about folks with mental illness, he could go on and do amazing things. He's brilliant. He's an amazing person, but he can't get the care that he needs, right? Do you have an experience like that? Has anybody in your family ever not been cared for, not gotten the care they need? That's how you tell a story. You fully paint the picture and then you bring it back and you give it to the voter and ask them to share. You model what you'd like to hear from the voter. You don't tell a story of a story, like I mentioned. You don't say, well, it was yesterday, and when I was at the store. That's a story of a story, right? You want to say, yesterday I went to the supermarket. I was trying to get juice boxes for my kids because, you know, they got to have stuff for lunch, right? And I'm looking at the shelves and they're all empty. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then I go over to buy the meats and I'm thinking, these prices are outrageous. I can't afford this. This is ridiculous. Have you ever been in a situation where you were like, I don't know what I'm going to do. How am I going to pay for this? People can relate to your stories. Next slide, please. Some more helpful phrases and tools is acknowledging and validating. And this is, again, this is key, right? And it's genuine, because when people open up to you, you want to thank them. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do, right? Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Or I hear you. Now, this doesn't mean that you're going to agree with everything that everybody says, right? People say some crazy stuff, right? You don't have to validate that. You can just say, I hear what you're saying. I do. I want to ask you about this, though. You can pivot, right? Or you can say, I heard that from a lot of people. Yeah, I keep hearing that. That comes up a lot. I thank you for sharing. I appreciate your perspective. Next slide, please. Voters don't share automatically, right? It's up to us to be great listeners. It's up to us to be compassionately curious. It's up to us to continue to ask those open-ended questions and dig. And it's harder than it sounds. Next slide, please. I want to show you this example. Well, we'll play this example for you. It's Alan canvassing on marriage equality. And what you'll see is a first clip when he talks to the voter. And I want you to kind of look at what he's doing. Listen for what he's doing. And then I'm going to have you respond in the chat since we got a few extra minutes. Just listen to kind of what he's doing, what's going on. And then after he is coached, you'll see that well, let's just go ahead and play.
Berta, we can't hear it.
Yeah.
That's not their choice.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm like,
Yeah, and I didn't realize
you know what I
until
mean?
yeah.
That I really believe. I do believe also that a lot of women are born like that, and they just, especially
Well, here's
now,
what I learned when I was in college, right?
like
So
nowadays, you know, teenagers,
Uh-huh.
they just try. Like I've seen and I know, you know, that they try. So I was like, why would you do that? I don't know. I just.
so like when I was in college, I took psychology class, and so one of the things that they teach you is what's called the Kinsey scale.
I know there's some folks have asked that we restart that. Is that
Would you be in
possible?
favor of gay marriage or against?
Yeah. Excuse me, sorry.
Can we restart?
Yeah, and I can't expand the screen, but I will start again.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
On the scale of 0 to 10.
Can you hear now?
I'll go for it. I mean,
Yeah, like a 10 or
I would say 10.
really? So you don't have any big concerns about it?
No.
Okay.
No.
You remember that at all?
Yeah.
Or is there change your opinion about it? Are you still a 10? Or?
Well, you know what? That I think teaching the kids that it was, I think that was not right.
Uh-huh. I mean, does that affect your how you vote on gay marriage?
Well, I think that what I wouldn't like is to tell my kids,
Yeah.
you know, in school, teach them that it's okay.
So are you still a 10 on gay marriage then?
Yeah. I really believe that a lot of kids are born like that. I really do, and that's not
Yeah.
that's not their choice.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm like,
Yeah, and I didn't realize
you know what I
until
mean?
yeah.
That I really believe. I do believe also that a lot of women are born like that, and they just, especially
Well, here's
now,
what I learned when I was in college, right?
like
So
nowadays, you know, teenagers,
Uh-huh.
they just try. Like I've seen and I know, you know, that they try. So I was like, why would you do that? I don't know. I just.
So like when I was in college, I took psychology class, and so one of the things that they teach you is what's called the Kinsey scale. Would you vote in favor of gay marriage or against it, or would you be undecided?
I'm undecided.
Okay. What are your? I guess you said conflicted, right?
Yeah,
So
I have a family member who's gay and would like to get married at some point. And
okay.
so for that person, I'm for it, but
Yeah.
I've always grown up not approving of that.
So what is your background in terms of that?
Well, just a very religious family.
I guess you hadn't really thought about it until you had like a family member came out,
Right,
right?
right.
Was this a close family member?
Yes.
Or you might have asked your relation or
It's my son.
your son? Okay.
You know, he's expressed to me that they would like to get married if they could at some point.
So
And you know, I just want him to be happy.
yeah. What's holding you back in terms of your previous upbringing? Because maybe there's some things that you were taught as a child that you don't believe now.
Yeah, well,
whether or not
it's forbidden, and that's not God's plan, and that kind of stuff, and that's fine on a general basis, but when it comes to your own family, it's different. And like I said, I love him. And I just want to be happy, whatever. This is the mother. So,
I'll give you a hug.
no, absolutely.
What's the right place for you on a scale of 0 to 10?
Oh, let's see. Oh, give me a.
Wow. Thanks so much for sharing that. I appreciate it. So I saw one or two things in chat. First, I want to kind of just make sure I know. I think it was Tony and Jane, you both had questions, and I will get to those. Okay, just checking the chat. And I see some of the responses in the chat are dead on, right? So in the first clip, what you noticed was Alan interrupted quite a bit. And it although that woman continued to talk through, she was good. It's never a good idea to interrupt if they're still on topic, right? You want to kind of utilize that silence and let them talk, especially if they are on the topic that you're talking about. In the second one, what you'll see is the biggest difference is he learned to utilize silence. Somebody says in the chat, good listening is everything in big caps. And that's true. Thank you for that, Kathy. It is true. He listened. And then if you noticed, he asked what relation that family member was. He started to dig, right? And then she got emotional. And that's where we're going with this. We need to kind of find that emotional core behind that vote, that decision, that opinion, so that we can try to unpack it. Okay. Now, a couple of things that came up in the chat that I want to kind of address real quick. One of them was when we're telling our story, or when somebody else we're canvassing someone and they start going off on a tangent, and it's happened, it will continue to happen, right? What you want to do is gently interrupt and say, you know what, I really appreciate you sharing that. One of the things I'd really like to know is, and you pivot, you redirect that conversation. You can't let them go on a tangent on a topic that is unrelated. If it's a topic that's related, that's great. You can get in some questions. If it is unrelated, you want to stop them and say, I totally appreciate what you're saying. Let me get your thoughts on this, and then move the conversation along. Next slide, please. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit more about responsive storytelling, how to share and how to relate, and why we use stories. Next slide, please. Again, we use stories, to share our experiences, our opinions, our emotions. We do it to identify common ground. We do it with friends, coworkers, strangers. We do it to build rapport in various situations. And I'm going to tell you a story right now. During the 2020 election, at that time I was on Facebook. I am no longer out there. And I lost a lot of friends. I lost a lot of friends. I lost some people that weren't really friends, you know how that happens on Facebook. But I lost a lot of friends because of the stuff they were saying in support of Trump. And I had a really hard time with it, a really hard time. Since learning the skills of deep canvassing, I've actually let some of those folks back in my life. And I've asked them about their opinions. And I've tried to listen without judgment and share my own. And we've, a couple of those folks changed their opinion. They, after talking about it, they reflected and they understood. I shared my stories of racism. I shared my stories of economic hardship, and they got it, right? They got it. So you can use deep canvassing in a myriad of ways with all kinds of folks. And it does change people's minds. Next slide, please. We share these stories to share a part of ourselves and to connect. And it's so important to connect with voters. It's so important to get out there and show that we have so much more in common than we have that is different. Next slide. So what makes a good story? Emotional relevance, of course. Kind of going over those 5 senses. Authenticity, a beginning, a middle, and an end. When you tell the story, this is what happened to me. When I talked a little bit about the grocery store, I told you why I needed those juice boxes. It was for my kids' lunch. And I told you about the grocery store and the shelves being empty. Hopefully, if I did a good job, you could feel yourself in my shoes. You could feel yourself standing in the grocery store, looking at the empty shelves and thinking, what the heck? Where is all the food? And then going over to the meat and thinking, oh my God, it's gone up $5 or whatever it's gone up, right? Next slide, please. What the research shows, and this gets to your point, Tony, is facts and talking points, they have absolutely no persuasive impact. If you were talking to me on the phone or talking to me as a deep canvasser and I had one opinion and you started spouting facts, I would completely shut down. That doesn't matter to me. They have no persuasive impact. In fact, they might have the opposite, right? They might push people away. Next slide. When we share only our stories, we have short-term persuasion. Again. But when we surface the voters' stories, good, please, we have lasting persuasion. In fact, what the research shows is that deep canvassing, by surfacing the voter story, by sharing our own story, is 102 times more effective than any other method of mailers or GOTV or TV ads. Deep canvas conversations last typically, or at least what's been studied, 9 months. Judith mentioned in the beginning that I had been deep canvassed, and I was. It was on healthcare and immigration. And, I came home from work. Actually, it wasn't work. I had dropped off my daughter at soccer, pulled into my driveway, which I live out in the country and I have a very long driveway. So anybody that's here is supposed to be here. And there was a car in my driveway, which I'm a little wary of. And I thought to myself, oh, what is this? And the person got out and started talking. Hi, how are you doing? And we got into a conversation, and 20 minutes later, it's starting to get dark. And I've thoroughly enjoyed myself, right? And then they go about their business. I go about my business. And I am in a Zoom room approximately 8 months later, and I recognize a face. And at that point, I had no Zoom etiquette. This is the beginning of, 2020, was it? Yeah. And I said, hey, I know you. You came to my house. You talked to me. I remembered that conversation. Not only did I remember it when I saw the person, but I remembered it each and every time I heard something about healthcare. That conversation stuck with me because that person built a relationship with me and explained her position by sharing her story. Next slide, please. So how do you get the voter to share their story? Next slide, please. You listen for a hint of a story, just that little hint. Voters aren't going to give it all away, like I said before. So they might say something like, yeah, you know, my cousin was, she had the same thing happen to her. Cousin, that's my hint. I'm in. I'm digging now. I'm going to start digging. Next slide. And I'm going to dig by using this cone of curiosity. Your cousin? Really? What's her name? What's their name? Oh, okay. So Daniel. Wow. So Daniel mentioned this. What was Daniel saying? I'm going to just keep digging, keep digging, keep digging. And then I'm going to finally say something like, well, how did that make you feel when Daniel relayed that story? I want to get to the feelings, right? Curiosity and stories go hand in hand in a lot of these phone calls, and you just have to dig. You've got to find the emotional core of the conflict that that person is facing. Next slide. What you don't want to do is dig these surface holes, like 7 surface little holes or 7, surface little conversations. When you hear that hint of a story, you want to start digging and keep digging that one big hole till you get to that story goal. You're digging all the way down with those open-ended questions. Tell me more. When did it happen? Where did it happen? What was their name? What day was it? Was this last year? This year? How did that make you feel? Next slide, please. Yes, Susan, that also shows the voter you're listening to them. Thank you. I see the chat. I wish I could respond to all of it. It's great stuff. And I appreciate you being so active in the chat. Okay, so this is one of my favorite quotes. Listening is not merely talking. You can listen like a blank wall or like a splendid auditorium where every sound comes back fuller, and richer. That's Alice Miller. Next slide. This is one of my favorite clips. This is a conversation between a canvasser named Jackson, who goes by he, him, and a voter named Clint. This is one of the first deep canvas recordings or conversations ever recorded back in 2009. It's 2 minutes and 30 seconds of a much longer clip. And well, let's get into it. But I want you to see or notice, based on our conversation, based on listening and asking those questions, what is Jackson doing? You can go ahead and play. Thank you.
We're talking to folks about marriage for gay and lesbian couples. Do you remember that being on the ballot in 2008? Okay. Prop 8. Yeah. Do you remember how you voted on it?
We didn't vote.
You didn't vote. Okay. What would you say is on the side for you that's holding you back from supporting it? I'm just trying to understand better.
Basically, I kind of didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to make the wrong choice.
Yeah, sure. You want to do the right thing.
And now you're making me think about this. I happen to have a cousin. She's lesbian and I love very much. Mm-hmm. And she's been with another woman for like about 20 years.
Oh, wow. That's a long time.
So I don't have any prejudice towards that.
What's your cousin's name?
Her name is Jill.
Okay. So it seems like Jill would be real happy, right? If she could get married.
They'd like to, especially if they're going through financial troubles.
Yeah, that's
and I believe this stuff, I get emotional.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, seems like it's really hard.
Well, when it comes to health issues,
just curious, why does it, make you feel so emotional? What is it?
Because right now we can't.
Yeah, yeah. Really hard. And I just know how much you love and care for them. And for a lot of folks, it's about protecting this sort of idea of man, woman, and things like that. But for us, it's about protecting each other.
Yeah, you told me that I was bringing this stuff up, and I realized that about my cousins. As much as I love them and stuff, I don't know that I take it in internally as much.
Yeah.
That's like you're saying about voting. Why didn't I do now? Because it wasn't something that was really super personal to me.
So we're going to be voting on this again in the future. I mean, what do you think would be the right thing to
I
do?
vote for teens to be able to legally get married.
And why does that feel right to you?
Because I think if two people love each other, they love each other. They want to respect that.
Thank you. Thank you. Next slide, please.
We're talking to folks about marriage for gay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We're going to kind of go over a script review. I noticed a lot of questions in the chat, and I do believe we may have some time as soon as I finish these next sections to kind of answer those, because some of them are really good. So I'm gonna do my best. Next slide, please. So this is a review, so it's a repeat. Every Deep Canvas script follows the same structure. You have that building rapport section where you kind of just get into the conversation. You have the 1 to 10 scale. That's that intro and that first rating. And again, that intro is that building the rapport. You then go into the story share section of the script. There's a make the case section. And that's really just when we're sharing with the voters about why you're out here. Really, that's all that the make the case is. Really, the reason why I'm out here today is because I believe that voting is so important. Voting is important because you're making the case for your canvas. And then you process any concerns. That's like holding a mirror up to the voter. And basically you can say something like, I on the one hand, I heard you say that, you feel like your vote doesn't count. But on the other hand, I also heard you say that, you think that people need to do more. And I'm just trying to kind of understand that, if you could help me, because I think that one way that we could do more is to exercise our vote. What do you think about that? You're holding a mirror up. You kind of let them see what they just said. Let them process their cognitive dissonance, right? And then you have the final rating or the wrap up. And again, that's another 1 to 10. You want to see, because Deep Canvas is all about persuasion. You're trying to persuade somebody. You're persuading through the stories. So you want to see if you've been able to move them. Most of the time, I would say it's successful. Sometimes you're going to get folks that just don't move, and that's okay. Next slide, please. Just a real quick best practice. Next slide. And the next one. Thank you. So again, step 1, you want to use your script for that rating and building the rapport. Don't ever ask for permission. I used to have a person on my team. They started every conversation with, "Do you have a minute?" And I would say, "Don't do that." Because if you called me and said, "Do you have us?" "No, I don't. Sorry." Click. I'm hanging up. I don't have time. Don't ever ask for permission. You want to build rapport and smile, right? We're happy to be out there. We're happy to be doing this work. We're organizers. You want to tell a little bit about yourself. You use your 1 to 10 scale and be confident. And then always, always follow up with those open-ended questions. Next slide. Step 2, the story share, and your goal is to really elicit those emotional experiences. Get that voter to share their story and then share your own, excuse me. If they're not willing to share a story first, share your story. And then say, what do you think about that? Has anything like that ever happened to you? Again, those open-ended questions. Next slide, please. The other thing about the story share, when you do tell your story, you're modeling the kind of story that you want the voter to hear, or the voter to share, excuse me. It builds trust. It shows that you're vulnerable, right? You want to give details and paint a picture. Tell about how it makes you feel and why it makes you feel that way. It's so important. Again, you're modeling what you want to hear from the voter. Next slide, please. When you make that case, you know, you're really out there just telling them why, right? So this is a make the case from one of the scripts that I use. And I'm going to read it verbatim, and I know it's going to be a little boring, but when you have a make the case in your script, if it's in there, you don't have to read it verbatim. I just don't remember this one that well anymore. This past year has shown us that life is unpredictable, and through the chaos, if we were able to, we continue to work hard, right? We provided for our families and we contributed to our communities. We're producing the things this country needs and providing the services that keep our communities running. Hardworking Americans deserve gratitude. Now we need the government to step up and create good, permanent jobs that provide security and stability for our families with wages that keep up with rising costs. We're doing our part. Now it's time for them to do their part, right? We need an economy where hard work is respected and pays. We don't need to work 2 jobs, 3 jobs to make ends meet. That's not a life. Our communities deserve better. That's a make the case, right? Next slide, please. Again, processing conflict. If you have a conflicted voter, you're going to hold that mirror up. On the one hand, I heard you say this. On the other hand, I heard you say this. Can you help me understand? I'm confused. Step 5, next slide, sorry. Again, it gives us a chance to think about where that voter landed. This is that final scale question. It's not a perfect measure, by no means. Sometimes you're in that conversation, you're standing at that door, that voter shared stories. You moved that person, but they're not going to give you the satisfaction of that rating, and that's okay. That is okay. Next slide, please. Finally, in the script, you're going to thank them because they did take the time to share with you. You just kind of wrap up the combo. Thank you so much for sharing. This has meant a lot to me. You know, I hope you enjoyed the conversation because I sure did. Next slide. Okay. Instead of going here, I am going to ask that we put it on the last slide, the very last one. Okay. That is my email address. That is a link which I will drop in the chat before we finish. And what that link is to is I'm going to be holding in-depth trainings throughout the summer, June, July, August. Those are typically 2-hour trainings, 3-hour trainings, and we'll be doing some additional follow-up trainings on skills and redirects and assertiveness. If you ever want to drop in, it's free. You're welcome to come. The more, the merrier. Now, I would love to, if you could unspotlight me, I'd love to take some questions because I do have a few minutes and I'm happy to answer some stuff. Judith, do you mind?
I think it's great. Thank you so much for taking
Yeah.
questions. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a little happy face. And if you click on that, you can raise your hand and Bonnie can take you in order of the raised hands. And it looks like Karen already has her hand up, and if she could unmute.
Hi, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I really learned a lot.
Oh,
My
thanks.
question is about at what stage does deep canvassing happen? Because oftentimes when I go to a canvassing, it's really all about GOTV, and you're instructed that if someone isn't interested, you know, it looks like they won't be voting your side, to just say, okay, thank you, have a great day, and move along. Don't spend time on persuasion. So, but clearly there, you know, it sounds like there's a time and place for each type of canvas. So I'd love to get more context on when deep canvassing happens and what are the right settings for it.
Great. That's a great question. Excellent question. So I use deep canvassing in every canvas, even if it's get out the vote, right? It may be a shorter version of it. You are correct in that I don't spend a lot of time. So for instance, I love to live in examples because it brings it to life. When I worked on the 2020 campaign, Biden versus Trump, I would get hardcore Trump folks. I didn't spend a whole lot of time, right? But I did make my case. I did tell them, you know, I totally appreciate where you're coming from. Let me just share with you, you know, the reason why I'm voting for Biden. And then I would go into my reasons and I'd say, thank you so much for listening. And I would get off because I knew I couldn't persuade that person, especially if they were starting with their talking points, right? But you can use deep canvassing in any situation, even get out the vote. Hi, how are you doing today? Gosh, you have a beautiful yard. Looks, the day is gorgeous. How are things going? You know, and what I like to do when I do deep canvassing, when it's in person, I like to look at my surroundings. If they have toys in the yard, I'm going to ask about kids. Are these your kids? Or, you know, get myself into that conversation. If I'm on the phone and I hear kids in the background, I say, oh my goodness, I hear your kids. That's amazing. How many do you have? Before I get into why I'm there, I need to build that rapport in any canvas. And then I'll get into, you know, I wanted to talk to you about your vote. Are you going to register to vote this year? Are you planning on voting? And then I get into it. And I'm going to tell my story of why I think it's important. So I use it in every context. And I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So Susan, unmute.
Bonnie, this is an amazing presentation. I'm so grateful I got to hear it. Thank you. One thing that you talked about is how you customize the script and just now how you build rapport. And people have brought up so many times to us in phone banks the limitations of the scripts, especially the intro paragraph. So, and especially in phone banking, I mean, canvassing is very different, but how do you start the conversation? Like, how do you use the script, but you still facilitate what all you just talked about?
That's a great question. And what I will say first too, Susan, is that if you ever want some of my scripts, I've got a bank and I'm happy to share. That's number one. Number two is, you know, usually, and I've only really canvassed on the phone. I've been traditional canvassing, knocking at doors, but for the last 2 years, because of COVID, I do this phone canvassing. And it's the same, it's pretty much the same as on the doors. I'm listening though for my cues, right? But I typically say, hi, this is Bonnie with Down Home, North Carolina. We're talking to folks today about healthcare. How are you doing? And then I wait. And then they say, who are you with? I'm fine. Who are you with? Oh, great question. We're a community group. You know, we call because a lot of times folks aren't listened to, and we're out here listening to our neighbors because sometimes we're not asked. So I just want to kind of talk to you a little bit about healthcare. Is everything else going good? You know, a lot of times during COVID, I would say, how are you dealing with this whole thing that's going on? I mean, it's crazy out here, right? You know, I'm talking to them like I'm talking to a friend. Now, I do have a benefit. I do have a, you know, an in here because my kids say I can bump into a mannequin and have a 15-minute conversation. However, I think anybody can do it. If you've ever been at the supermarket and just started striking up a conversation with a stranger, it's the same thing, right? So you just want to get in there, you know, maybe the intro is, how are you doing now that things are kind of opening back up? For me, the last 2 years have been crazy. If they don't want to talk, then you start. Last 2 years have been crazy. Let me tell you what, I mean, it's been, you know, I mean, not only did my husband lose his job, but how's it been for you? Are you well? Oh, so, I'm so glad. Well, that's exactly, you know, that the reason I'm calling is I really do want to talk about this. But you can email me. I'll share my, if you're doing the GOTV, I have a script. I've just culled them from everywhere and I'm happy to share whatever I have. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Bonnie. Wow, a number of people have lined up. It's so great that you're answering questions right now. Gary, please unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Gary.
Hey there. Hi, Susan Piper. Anyway, I've been involved in, as many people on here, in campaigns for a long time. I've been a campaign consultant, manager, and I just want to say, I mean, I wanted to call people up who I know are running for office like right now and say, stop your canvassing, get on this call, learn, but I'm going to have them do it after they canvass. But just so amazing what you've shared.
Thank you.
Really. And so the challenge is, I guess, for voters who, you know, you try to engage them and they're like, no, I don't want to be engaged, but you still want to work them. So you kind of talked about that with the last question, but you know, you run into that more often, you know. So how does one really get past that? You know, you obviously don't want to say, do you have a minute? That's a very good point, but how do you get past that? Because there are people right away, especially on the phone, but even in person, it's harder on the phone. But that's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it gets harder and harder the closer you get to election day too, right? Because they've gotten a zillion calls. Again, you know, a lot of times when I'm making these deep canvas calls and during the election, I start out again, building that rapport. And if they say, you know, is this a political call? I'll say, no, I really just kind of want to hear what you've got to say. I talk about the issues that candidate stands for, right? So if they are for healthcare for all, here in our state, we are trying to expand Medicaid. If my candidate is for expanding Medicaid, I'm going to get into some health stories. Have you or your family ever experienced a health crisis? Is anybody you know? I'm going to talk about healthcare. And then I'm going to talk about my healthcare. And then I'm going to say, you know, Mary Smith, she's running for office. She believes the same way we do, because we have a lot in common. And then, so I start with their story, my story, and then the candidate story, but never really specifically the candidate. It's what they stand for that the person is going to vote for, right? So that's where I root my stories, where I root my discussion. And a lot of times that keeps folks in the conversation. That building the rapport is key to keeping them from hanging up on you or slamming that door in your face. Hope that helps, Gary.
Thank you. Yes.
So, but sorry, I'm going to have trouble pronouncing it. Basuki, is that correct? Please unmute.
You said it right. Thank you.
Oh, great.
Hi, Bonnie.
Hi.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I do have a question. I was canvassing door to door for our US Congressman Josh Harder with a partner. So we run into this guy, he's a libertarian. He started accusing Democrats, Biden, and you name it. I was very uncomfortable, but my partner started talking to him and with arguments and all that. So I didn't know how to get out. I didn't want to offend both of them, but I stood there like what is it? With no action to express. So how do I get out of this situation? If you can guide me.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I saw one like that from Tony in the chat. First, I will tell you that either in person or on the phone, if you don't feel safe, get out. That's the very first thing. It is difficult to try to drag that partner away, I'm sure, but get out as best you can. Second, it is never productive to argue facts with somebody that thinks they have all the facts, right? You've probably been at a dinner table with somebody that did that, and it's a no-win situation. Instead, you've got to root that in issues. If they start talking about Biden this, Biden that, I hear you. I hear that a lot from a lot of different folks. But what do you think about, bring it to the issue? What do you think about healthcare? What's your stance on that? I'm really curious. I'd love to know. What do you think about another situation? What do you think about, it's hard for me to, what do you think about the government spending? What do you think about minimum wage? What are your thoughts there? Because I'm totally interested in what you have to say. I'd love to know, that's how I pivot a conversation. That's how I change a conversation. That's how I shut it down. I've had so many people in the last year get on a mask rant. And so I'll just say, yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that. I hear you. But let me ask you about this. And I completely changed the subject. I redirect. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. You have a follow-up?
One quick comment. I agree with you. I made one comment to the gentleman, and since you know a whole lot how to run the country, why don't you run for the office? He says, I'm useless.
He said that you were useless, or he was useless?
No, he said, I suggested to run to the office so that you can make a good contribution to this country. He said, no, I'm useless. Nobody will listen to me.
Oh, that was an opportunity right there.
Yeah.
That was a great opportunity. I'm here to listen, and I want to know what you think about this.
Probably my thinking was my mind was shut off because he was admiring Trump. So I'm sure he was supporting Trump. So the moment I heard that, my brain shuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
One of the things that I want to tell everybody is this. Some of the best conversations I have had have been with Trump supporters, have been with people that are on the opposite end of the spectrum politically from me, right? It gives me a whole lot of insight into what folks are thinking. It gives me an opportunity to really break that down and see what we have in common. Because I, believe it or not, have a lot in common with some Trump supporters. Not our politics necessarily, not who we're voting for, but I have other things in common. And that's why the key to making Deep Canvas work is listening without judgment. It takes a lot. But I had, and I know I don't have much time, but I had one gentleman tell me this past spring that he felt that Blacks were lazy, Blacks didn't want to work, that all of them are on welfare and blah, 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 blah. Well, obviously I'm Black. He can't tell because we're on the phone. And I said, well, what makes you say that? I'm really curious. And he said, well, where I lived. And then he went on to tell his story. And I said, was that everybody where you lived? Well, no, not everybody. I said, did you see some folks going to work and trying to make a life for themselves and their kids? You know, because sometimes people need that extra assistance, right? And then I went on to say, you know, I'm Black and that hasn't been my experience. But I understand why you might say that. And then I said, you know, it seems to me that people are constantly trying to divide us. Because if we came together on what we need as a group, as a people, as a country, boy, we'd be really powerful. And he agreed. We had a great conversation. And I mean that. Listen without judgment. It's key.
Bonnie,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you so much. We are running out of time. Susan, is your question a quick one, or if it's lengthy, I'm afraid we might have to
No,
take.
I think it is a quick one, and that I'm listening to what Bonnie is saying and thinking, yes, I should be doing more of this. I'm learning a lot of things because I've been phone banking for years, but there was one key point that makes the difference. You're with Down Home, North Carolina. That does not shout politics. For those of us making calls, we are representing the California Democratic Party or a local Democratic group, and that broadcasts immediately whether someone's going to stay on the phone or not. So I'm interested in another way around it. I generally, if it's close to an election, introduce myself. I'm with the such and such, which says politics. I'm not fundraising, and I only need 60 seconds of your time. That generally keeps them on the phone long enough. I've had people say the clock's ticking, start talking. 5 minutes later, we're still talking. But any suggestions you have to get around that red light that says politics?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, and I don't know how this lands with you, but I would just say I'm with a community group out here in California. You don't have to identify that it's the Democratic Socialists of America. You know, you don't have to do that. I'm with a community group and I'm just calling folks because I really want to hear what you have to say about boom.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry we can't pursue it any further, but we're starting to go over. Bonnie, your talk was wonderful. People are wanting the email address for your class again. If you can please post that in chat before you go. And
oh, I'm not leaving, I'm staying.
Oh, great. Thank you. But please post that. And Berta, if you could put the renaming slide up again. So if you haven't had a chance to rename yourself, we are just about to break out into breakout rooms. If you have a moderate speaking ability for Spanish, you want to learn electoral vocabulary, which is very different than everyday Spanish. You want to know how to talk to various generations and genders. Please put ESP in front of your name for this really wonderful training. And if you want to learn how to talk to the high potential voters, we've been learning a lot already. This will really take you to that next level. Please put 34 in front of your name. And if you've never renamed yourself before, look for participants at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Your name will pop up to the right of your screen. Take your icon to hover over the Zoom icon. You'll see the word more. Then you'll see the word rename. Click on rename and rename yourself. Click on rename one more time. That saves it. And Myra, are the breakout rooms ready?
We are ready to go.
All right. You will now be moved into your breakout room. And thanks again, Bonnie. That was really great. All right, so Nick, did you want to be moved into a particular room? Nick? Fine. Mary, did you want to be moved into a breakout room? And Minka, did you want to be moved into a breakout room? Unmute yourself. Unmute.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll have to quit that because I haven't even breakfast this morning. I kind of had a cold morning. Thank you very much. It was lovely, but I have to.
Oh,
and I
thank you for
think I gotta-
joining us. Really
Okay, thank you.
appreciate it.
Okay.
Of
okay,
course.
bye.
Oh,
Thank you.
Call, let's see, we need to move Colleen into the breakout room 34. Okay, Colleen.
And Mary into 34 as well.
Okay, and Mary into 34, great.
You can do me last.
Okay, where do you want to go, Susan?
And then are we recording in these rooms?
Yeah, they're supposed to be recording. And it
Okay.
won't go on to the main recording. It goes to local.
Right. Well, we can splice it together.
Your voice sounds so different right now. I
Oh,
didn't know
that's-
you were talking. I
Doesn't
didn't
have a
realize.
headphone.
I'm actually using the.
Oh, that's fine. I was like, who is that, sweetie? It's Cecilia. So
They were
Nick,
Testing my
I'd like to
microphone
move
is different.
Nick, where
I
do you
think
want to
Nick
go?
is on there.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Is it Stuart? I'm
Such great presentations, really
These
oh,
were great.
good.
spectacular. Up here comes Roberto Espanol.
Okay. Let's see if he got moved once. Nope. Oh, he is assigned.
Oh, sometimes that if they show up on.
Let's see.
both- Oh,
name.
there,
Oh.
there you go.
I'm gonna move Nick whether he wants it or not.
Well, if you don't mind, I would like to listen in on a little of both of them.
Yeah,
can-
yeah.
is it
You're
okay-
free to hop around as much as you want.
Can you co-host me so I can?
You are. I co-host you
I didn't know
early
that.
on. I co-host.
Oh, I see now. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. But
Yeah.
for some reason, I don't see breakout rooms underneath
Oh,
the
that's
in the
weird.
bar. Do you see them?
Oh, go to more. Go to
Oh,
the
okay,
three
okay, all
dots.
right,
You'll
okay.
see it.
Oh,
there.
yeah, now I see it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Judith. It's really, I'm
Oh,
just,
good. I'm so glad.
I mean, David, so inspiring. It's okay that he didn't get into the, the nitty gritty. It was just like, just what we needed to hear.
Yeah, it was.
The two of them together were fabulous.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
true.
That's
It's
what
all
I
you need to
think.
know, basically, literally.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go see 34.
Did
Okay.
you want to hop into the room, Cecilia? too?
Actually, I'll just hang out here. I'm going to pause the recording on this.
Oh, good idea. Thank you.